Carries. Next item is Mr. Victor Mema, Director of Finance, to provide a presentation titled "Why a 0% property tax increase is not a 0% property tax increase for everyone."
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm at a disadvantage coming after the Youth Council, but you can trust me, I'm bringing you good news too. The presentation I'm going to make is a response to a number of inquiries that we've received from members of the public as they come through to pay their property taxes for 2016. And the subject here is what the 0% property tax increase meant or means, and also to understand how the calculation was done. Now, I understand that we have varying relationships with property taxes, but the intent of the presentation is not to relitigate how we got to a 0%, but to explain how this impacted individual properties as it's shown in their bills that they are paying between now and end of June. Having said that, I think we appreciate the members of the public who have come forward. Some have written to council, some have sent us emails, some have called, and we encourage that so we can work with individual property members to explain how this worked for them. So with those brief comments, I will go straight into the presentation. So a basic understanding of how our property tax base comes about. At the end of each year, the BC assessment, who do the property evaluations for municipalities in BC, go through a process of evaluating our properties across the city. And so they start off with the previous year's property assessment for a particular individual property. They look at what they call non-market growth, which is new constructions. If you have improvements to the house or you've built a new house, that will be non-market growth. They also have to take into account what they refer to as the market growth, which is influenced by the buying and selling of properties across the city. And that varies. In some years, there's market growth. There's market growth from selling and buying. In some years, there isn't, depending on how that looks like. Then you end up with this new property assessment for the house. And there is a process, obviously, that I'm not going to go through, but there is a process where members of the public, property owners, have the chance to engage with BC Assessment to look at how their property evaluation has grown or not grown and have an adjustment if that is warranted. So that's how that piece is done. And this piece is done by the external body. And as a city, we receive the final property evaluation report. And that's what we work with. So we're not able to answer some of the questions around evaluation, and those we direct to BC Assessment. So how did we get where we are? You may recall that in November 2015, when we brought our initial draft financial plan, we were asking council for an increase of 1.7% in property tax, equivalent to about $1.7 million. The Chief Administrative Officer worked with staff and council. We had some significant reductions in recurring expenses that allowed us to eliminate that $1.7 million requirement, which meant that we were not going to increase the amount of revenue from our property taxes from what it was last year for any additional cost or pressures that we had eliminated. Now, if you recall from the slide that I had before, I spoke about new construction. The city did grow. There was new growth, there was new construction, and this amounted to about $1.2 million in property tax revenue for the city. That amount was already accounted for. We expected it. We had actually incorporated that calculation in our property tax revenue that we're expecting. So it's not like we received a windfall. That $1.2 million was part of the calculation in the draft budget. The city also experienced a market growth of about 4.3% across the city. And that's a very critical number to keep in mind. So from the buying and selling of properties in the city, there was a market-induced growth in assessment of about 4.3%. I'm going to explain how this impacts our calculation in the way that we set our property tax rates. So we've sent these out, and for the majority, most property owners in Nanaimo, they have received theirs. We still have a few that have come back to us due to people moving, and so we're trying to reach as many people as we can. And for the benefit of those who are at home, if you haven't received a property tax notice, if you can reach out to the city so we can see if we missed you in terms of the mailings. But why I bring this up, I just wanted to highlight the area that's highlighted in yellow there. It is the city's general municipal property tax line. Of all these lines that you see up there, the city is responsible or accountable for that line. Everything else is decided elsewhere. Some is decided at the RDN, some is decided at the Vancouver Island Regional Library. And as much as the city spoke of a 0% property tax increase, that was only for the municipal portion, the line that is highlighted there, and I'll explain that as we go down. So everything else that has changed, we are not able to answer for that. The other jurisdictions that will actually speak to those increases or decreases. For context, if you look at the annual residential tax increase for the past 5 years, you started off at about 4% in 2012. And for those who are following this, yes, in 2015 we had a 1% increase just for asset management. And in 2016 we actually had 0%. And you may recall that even at that 0%, we actually had enough to allocate funding equivalent to 1% in terms of our asset management, in line with Council's mandate on asset management. So, yes, our annual residential tax increases have been coming down since 2012, and we did hit the 0% in 2016. So why is a 0% property tax increase not a 0% for everyone? It's all about how the individual property assessment value changed in line of the average change in the city. And I'll walk you through that process. But if you can keep that in mind, that for an assessment that moved in line with the average movement, they would actually experience a 0%. For one that is on either side, if it increased more than 4.3%, you would see an increase in the dollar amount that you paid from last year to this year. If it was less than the average, which is the 4.3, you would see a decrease, and I will demonstrate that in a couple of slides. So this is probably a recap of what I just spoke about, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide other than that this speaks about how we arrive at the amount of money that we collect. So in this case for the city, we collected the total property tax dollars that we collected in 2015 as a number. We also collected, in addition, the new growth from construction, the $1.2 million, and that was it. So if you look at what happens in terms of rates, if you look at the 2015 residential property tax rate, it was 5.6780, and the 2016 is 5.144. So from an property tax rate, there was actually a decrease. There was actually a drop. And so that drop is because the assessment base increased. So you see a drop in the property tax rate for residential purposes. So I talked about the general movement induced by buying and selling of properties. Now, Council did make what I would call a philosophical stance, which said it doesn't matter what the market is doing, what the movements are. We are simply going to collect the same amount of property tax in dollars plus whatever is coming out of growth in 2016. Now, there is a philosophy behind that, which is where you're looking at what does that mean for affordability of property taxes. And we can have that conversation outside this presentation. But to me, what it said is you're collecting the same amount of property tax revenue from last year, and you're only increasing it by what is coming out of new growth. Now, if you remember that I said we had an average market change of 4.3%. So if we begin with 2015 as an example, if we picked an assessment that moved with the market, which means that increased at the average of 4.3. If the value in 2015 was $331,000, increase that by 4.3%, which is the average for the market across the city, the value would have come out to $345,000. If you take the rates, we spoke about the 2015 rate, which was at 5.678, and the new rate, which is a lower rate, which is 5.4481, and look at the city paid taxes. For this property, the owner would have paid in 2015 $1,880. In 2016, they would have paid $1,881.64, and this is just a rounding off. So this is the group of properties that actually truly experience the 0% property tax. If we take another example, if that property's assessment grew more than the 4.3%, in this case we're talking about a 10%, so this is more than the 4.3 average, and we apply the same logic that we applied in the previous slide. The property taxes paid in 2015 would have been the $1,880, but they would have paid $1,984 in 2016. And that variance is how far that house from evaluation moved away from the average 4.3% that's happening across the market. The fact that this house paid more in 2016 has no impact on the total amount of property taxes that the city collected in 2016. The city is still collecting in total from all residential houses an equal amount of money, only increased by the new growth. I'll take another example. So if we take where the property variance or growth is less than the average of 4.3, and there was no growth. So we're looking at this one here where the assessment in 2015 would have been 331, and it's still the same in 2015. So there was no growth in terms of assessment for this one. And we apply the same logic. They would have paid 1,880 in 2015. They would have paid less in 2016. And so the same logic applies where the total amount of property taxes that the city collected remains the same, and each property is varying based on how they have moved away from the average that's induced by the buying and selling of properties in the city of Nanaimo. So what are the key points? The 0% increase means there's no change to the amount of property taxes collected for city functions in total. Any change in tax amounts paid will depend on the change to a property assessment value relative to the average change of 4.3%. And I've just demonstrated that piece right now. So I also pointed out in one of my earlier slides that the city does collect taxes for other agencies, and those changes we cannot speak to or for. And here we're just addressing the municipal portion of our property taxes. So in short, I hope that explains why a 0% property tax increase is not a 0% property tax increase for everyone. Thank you, Worship.